My sister stole my husband, but said it was my fault. The night I found them together felt like the universe cracked open just to swallow me whole. I wasn't supposed to be home that early. My son had been at a sleepover, and I'd gone out for dinner with a coworker, only to feel a sudden migraine coming on. I decided to cut the evening short and surprise my husband by coming home earlier than planned. I thought maybe we could spend a quiet night together, like we used to. It was raining when I pulled into the driveway, the kind of heavy downpour that made everything feel heavier than it was. The house was dark except for a light glowing faintly from the guest room window. That struck me as odd. We hadn't used that room in weeks. I let myself in quietly, thinking I'd playfully scare him. Maybe he was watching TV in there, or reading. I took off my shoes, padded down the hall, and eased open the door. What I saw is burned into my memory like a brand. My sister was there, my younger sister, the one who used to braid my hair and cry on my shoulder when boys broke her heart. She was in the bed tangled in sheets. My husband was beside her, his arms slung over her waist. They were asleep, or so it seemed, until the door creaked louder than I'd meant for it to. They both stirred. My sister's eyes opened first. When she saw me, her face went from confusion to horror in a heartbeat. My husband sat up next, blinking, then quickly reaching for a pillow to cover himself. No words, not yet. Just silence, electric and roaring. I stood frozen, my breath shallow, heart thudding in my ears. "Wait," he said, his voice groggy and unsure. "It's not what it looks like." That line, that cliché. I almost laughed, but nothing about this was funny. My sister didn't speak at all. She just pulled the sheet tighter and turned her face away from me, as if that would undo what I'd seen. I closed the door quietly, walked down the hall and out the front door into the rain. The numbness was instant. My brain refused to process. I sat in the car, soaked, hands trembling on the steering wheel. I couldn't cry. I couldn't scream. I just sat there, staring at the windshield as water blurred everything beyond it. 10 years of marriage. A lifetime of sisterhood all shattered in one moment. Eventually, I drove off. I didn't know where I was going, just that I couldn't be there. I spent the night in a motel, staring at the ceiling, replaying that moment again and again. The image of them together, the betrayal etched into my mind. The next morning, I didn't go home. I went to my best friend's place and told her everything. She listened in silence, her face a mix of pity and disbelief. She made me tea. I didn't drink it. I checked my phone, 12 missed calls from him, 2 texts from her. One just said, "Please talk to me." The other was simply, "I'm sorry." Sorry didn't cover it. In one night, my family unraveled, and I had no idea what came next. But the worst part, I still wanted to believe there was some explanation, some way to fix it, because I loved them both, and I couldn't understand how they could do this to me. That was just the beginning. Before that night, my life was the kind people envied, or at least pretended to. We lived in a modest but warm house in the suburbs, filled with the kind of chaos that comes from raising a 7-year-old boy. My husband Dan worked in tech. He wasn't flashy or overly romantic, but he was reliable, steady, or so I thought. I worked part-time at a local community center and spent most of my days juggling chores, carpools, and homework sheets. My sister Mia was a frequent presence in our home. Ever since our parents retired and moved overseas, she'd started spending more time with us. She was younger by 4 years, always a little lost, always drifting between jobs and relationships. But I never minded. She was my little sister. I felt responsible for her in a way that went beyond logic. She would come over for dinner, sometimes stay the night when her apartment felt too lonely, and she even helped with my son. He adored her. Dan never objected. In fact, he welcomed her. "It's good for her to be around family," he'd say. And I agreed. If I look back now, and I do, often, I can see how close they were becoming. Not overtly, not in a way that raised alarms. But she laughed harder at his jokes than she ever had before, and he started asking about her day more than mine. I remember one night in particular. It was my birthday and we had friends over for dinner. Dan gave me a small necklace, gold, simple. Mia clapped and smiled and said, "That's exactly your style." Later, I found a receipt in Dan's coat pocket. He had bought 2 necklaces. When I asked him, he brushed it off. "One was a backup," he said. "I wasn't sure which one you'd like." I believed him. My son, Evan, had drawn a picture in school not long before that night. He proudly handed it to me when I picked him up. It showed our house and stick figures labeled, "Mom, Dad, me, and Auntie Mia." I asked him why Mia was there. He said, "Because she's always home with Dad." I remember blinking. "You mean when Mommy's not home?" He nodded. "She brings snacks and watches cartoons with me." That should have been the moment I felt something shift. But I dismissed it. Families help each other. Sisters help raise nieces and nephews. It's what we do. The truth is, I never imagined betrayal could come from inside the walls of my own home. And because I trusted both of them so deeply, so blindly, I kept letting little things slide, like when I found Maya's hoodie in Dan's car, Or when Dan forgot our anniversary dinner because he was working late, but Mia texted me from his number saying they were picking up surprise gifts. Even as I write this, I feel foolish. But that's the thing about betrayal, it always hides best behind love. Our son's bedtime routine was sacred. Every night Dan and I would read him a story, then I'd tuck him in and we'd talk for a few minutes. It was our bonding time. But over the months leading up to that night, Dan started letting Mia do it. She's better at voices, he'd joke. I would smile. I didn't want to seem jealous. I didn't want to be petty. I thought I was building something solid, a family bound by trust, by history, but they were building something else. I once overheard them talking in the kitchen. I was upstairs and they didn't know I'd come home early. Mia said, "You're the only one who sees me." Dan laughed, a low, familiar sound. "You make it hard not to." I told myself it was innocent. Maybe he was encouraging her. Maybe she was just feeling low. I didn't confront them. I didn't want to be the crazy wife. I didn't want to doubt my sister. That reluctance, that fear of rocking the boat, cost me everything. There's a strange kind of cruelty in being blindsided by people you love. The pain comes wrapped in confusion, wrapped in memory. Because it wasn't always like this. There were years of birthdays, hospital visits, holidays, and laughter. I still remember when Dan first met Mia. We were still dating and I brought him home for Thanksgiving. Mia had just turned 17, still full of sarcasm and braces. She was wearing a huge hoodie and sulking over not being allowed to go to a concert. Dane brought her pie and told her a dumb joke about mashed potatoes. She laughed so hard she snorted. That was the first time I saw them connect. And now, years later, they connected in a way that shattered me. Looking back, my life wasn't perfect. But it was mine. It was built slowly, deliberately, on love and loyalty, until that night when I opened the guest room door. And everything I thought I knew crumbled. It wasn't just that I missed the signs. It was that I saw them, and chose to explain them away. That's the thing about trust. It's not simply given, it's something we work hard to preserve, even in the face of growing unease. And with family, it's even harder to break that illusion. I wanted to believe Mia was still my sister, my best friend, the person I grew up protecting. I wanted to believe Dan was still my husband, loyal and solid, the man who held my hand through childbirth, but cracks had started to form long before I saw them together in that bed. I remember the first time I felt truly uncomfortable. Maya and Dan were in the kitchen cooking dinner. I was upstairs folding laundry. I could hear them laughing, not just polite chuckles. Full, belly, deep laughter that made me pause. When I came down, they looked up like teenagers caught sneaking a drink. Dan said, "Hey, we were just debating the best pasta shape." I smiled, pretending I didn't notice the way Mia looked down, biting her lip. Another time, I walked into the living room to find Mia asleep on Dan's shoulder. Evan was asleep beside them, a cartoon still playing on the screen. Dan looked up at me, startled, then carefully lifted Mia's head and stood. "She was tired," he said, rubbing his neck. "She has her own apartment," I replied, trying to sound casual. He didn't respond. But I said nothing else. I didn't want to be paranoid. That was the story I kept telling myself. That paranoia would make me the bad guy, not whatever I thought I was seeing. Then there was the weekend I went out of town for a conference. Maya had offered to help with Evan since Dan had a project deadline. I remember feeling grateful. I remember thinking how lucky I was to have such a supportive sister and husband. When I came back Sunday evening, the house was cleaner than I'd left it. Evan was happy, well-fed, and already in pajamas. But when I walked into our bedroom, I noticed a smell, not bad, just different. Perfume that wasn't mine. Maya's scent, the one she always wore when she went out. I found one of her earrings on the nightstand. Dan said she had taken a nap there after Evan's soccer game, that it was innocent, that I was imagining things, and I believed him. That was my mistake. I believed too easily. I trusted too hard. Another memory, Mia and I had a long-standing tradition of sister nights. Every other Friday we'd watch movies, do facials, and talk. But one evening, she canceled last minute, said she wasn't feeling well. I didn't think much of it. Later that night, Dan got a text and smiled at his phone. When I asked what it was, he said, "Just work stuff." But I caught a glimpse of the name on the screen. Mia. I asked him why she was texting him if she was sick. He shrugged. She wanted to talk about Evan's birthday plans. And still I nodded. I brushed it off. I think some part of me knew. But the rest of me wasn't ready to face it. Then there were the subtle changes in Mia. She started dressing up more when she came over. Nothing inappropriate, just different. Makeup, perfume, little dresses I hadn't seen before. She used to show up in sweats and ponytails. Now, she came like she was going somewhere special. I commented once, joking, "Wow, who are you trying to impress?" She laughed too hard. "Just trying to feel good about myself." I smiled, but something inside me curled inward. Dan had also started being more distant with me. He used to kiss my forehead when he left for work. That stopped. Our conversations got shorter. Our intimacy became rare, then non-existent. When I brought it up, he said he was stressed. Maya never asked about us. She used to be the first to probe when I had an argument with Dan. Now, she avoided the topic altogether. The final straw before that night was something seemingly small. I found a receipt in the kitchen, 2 movie tickets, a romantic comedy, dated on a weekday during the afternoon. I hadn't gone to a movie in months. When I asked Dan, he said he took a coworker as a break during a work-from-home day. Just needed a breather, he said. Mia didn't mention anything, but the popcorn kernel I found under the passenger seat of my car, the one she often borrowed, told a different story. It's strange how all these little things accumulated into a quiet dread I refused to name, because naming it would mean losing everything. I often think about that. The quiet betrayal, the moments that should have set off alarm bells but didn't, or maybe they did. Maybe I just pressed snooze, until that night, when I walked in on them, and it all made sense. The late night laughter, the quiet glances, the cancelled sister nights, the sudden distance, the perfume, the earring, the texts, the popcorn, it had all been there, and I had ignored it, for love, for family, for the illusion of safety. But illusions shatter no matter how long you cling to them, and mine shattered completely. I wasn't looking for secrets. I didn't set out to catch her. But sometimes, secrets come looking for you, even through the smallest of moments. It happened on a Thursday afternoon 2 weeks before the night everything unraveled. Maya had dropped by, unannounced, as she often did. She claimed she was there to bring Evan a book she'd promised him. I was in the middle of sorting through laundry, and my phone was dead, so I asked to borrow hers to make a quick call to Dan. Nothing unusual. She hesitated, just for a second. But in that second, something shifted in the air. A pause like that can mean many things, but in hindsight it meant everything. She handed it over with a casual shrug. Battery's low, but go ahead. I took it, walked a few steps away, dialed Dan's number and let it ring once. Then hung up. I wasn't calling him. I just needed a reason. Then I did something I'd never done to her before. I swiped down on her screen and typed, Dan. Several messages came up. Most of them were harmless. Coordination about Evan's school play, dinner ideas, even a shared joke about Evan wanting ketchup on pancakes. But one thread, one draft, caught my eye. It was unsent, sitting there in the drafts folder. The timestamp was from 3 days ago. It read, I wish you'd just tell her. I'm tired of feeling like this. We keep saying it's temporary, but it's been nearly a year. If she ever finds out from someone else, it'll destroy her. Maybe that's why you haven't told her. You don't want to be the bad guy. But you already are. I didn't breathe for a moment. I read it again. My brain refused to register it, but my body understood. My hands trembled. My stomach turned. I clicked out quickly and returned her phone. I forced a smile, said thanks, and excused myself to the laundry room, where I locked the door and sat on the cold tile floor. That message wasn't just a smoking gun. It was a confession. She hadn't sent it. That told me everything I needed to know. She was on the edge of breaking the silence, teetering between guilt and desire. And Dan was the coward who let it go on. The worst part, she still had the message saved. She hadn't deleted it. That meant part of her wanted to be caught, or punished, or freed. I didn't confront her. Not yet. I wanted to. My mouth filled with words, but my throat locked shut. Instead, I watched her that day. The way she sat with Evan, her eyes bright as he showed her his crayon drawings. The way she moved through our kitchen like she belonged there. And I kept replaying that message in my mind over and over, as though memorizing pain could somehow dull it. When she left, she hugged me, held on a bit longer than usual. I'll always love you, she said softly. I looked at her, searching her face for a flicker of shame. There was none. Just sadness. 2 days later, Dan came home late from work. I asked him how things were. He mumbled something about a new project. I made tea for us, placed his cup in front of him. He didn't meet my eyes. I asked, is there something I should know? He looked up briefly, blinked, and said, what do you mean? I could have screamed. I could have said I know about the messages. I know about her, but I didn't. Because a part of me still wasn't ready to break it all apart. A part of me was still hoping, irrationally, that I was wrong. That same night, I sat on the edge of Evan's bed, watching him sleep. His chest rose and fell so peacefully, unaware of the storm outside his little world. And I thought, maybe I can endure this for him. Maybe I can pretend a bit longer, but the draft message haunted me. It followed me into my dreams, echoing, if she ever finds out from someone else. That's when I realized I hadn't just stumbled upon a secret. I had stepped into a ticking clock, and it was counting down faster than I was ready for. So I waited, I watched, and when the night finally came, the night I came home early and opened that guest room door, there was no more doubt, no more waiting. The truth had been waiting for me all along. Quietly typed, never sent, but louder than any scream. I confronted them the morning after, not in a storm of rage, though my insides boiled with it, but in a kind of hollow clarity. I had spent the night at a motel on the edge of town, staring at a stained ceiling while my world spun silently out of orbit. By sunrise, something inside me had settled. Not peace. No, something colder. Something like resolve. I came back home at 7 a.m. Dan was in the kitchen, dressed for work, sipping coffee like nothing had happened. That alone enraged me more than the act itself. The casual posture of a man who thought he could pretend. Mia was gone. I stepped inside, closed the door, took off my coat slowly, deliberately. He looked up. You okay? I laughed, a short, bitter sound. You're really gonna ask me that? Dan froze. I walked past him, opened the cupboard, and pulled out a mug. I wanted him to squirm. I wanted him to speak first. But of course, he didn't. Cowards rarely do. Finally, I said it. I saw you. Last night. His eyes widened. What? In the guest room. I said. Her. Don't lie to me. He opened his mouth, then closed it. For a second, I saw something flicker in him, panic maybe. Shame. But then his jaw tightened. It wasn't what it looked like. I slammed the mug down. It cracked. Don't insult me, I said, voice shaking. Don't you dare insult me with that line. Silence stretched between us like a knife. Then he sighed, actually sighed, like he was the one burdened. We didn't plan it, he said quietly. It just happened. I stared at him. How long? He wouldn't meet my eyes. Dan, how long? He ran a hand through his hair. 8 months. 8 months. I felt the breath knock out of me. And you didn't think to tell me. I didn't know how, he whispered. No. You didn't want to deal with the consequences. I spat. You wanted both of us, and you thought we'd never find out. Still, he said nothing. I asked the question I had dreaded most. Do you love her? He looked at me then. Truly looked at me. I don't know, he said. That broke me. A part of me still hoped he'd say no, that it was a mistake. That he missed me, regretted everything, wanted to fix it. But I don't know. That was worse. That was a maybe. That was a door still open to her. She's my sister, I whispered. She's my blood. How could you both do this to me? She needed someone, he said. She was lonely. You were always so busy, so tired. There it was. The shift of blame. I stared at him in disbelief. You're blaming me? For your affair? I'm just saying. No, don't. You don't get to just say anything, I snapped. You chose this. Both of you? You chose it every single time. He looked down. I didn't want to hurt you. I laughed again. Then why didn't you stop? Still, he offered no answer. Just that same pathetic, tired expression. I wanted to scream, I wanted to throw something. But instead, I walked out. Later that day, I met Mia at a nearby cafe. I'd texted her a single line, we need to talk, alone. She showed up looking like she hadn't slept. Sunglasses on, hoodie pulled low. She sat across from me and didn't speak for nearly a minute. Then she said, I didn't mean for this to happen. I said nothing. I swear I never planned it. It just one day we talked, and it felt safe. He listened to me. I was lost, and he... You let yourself be found, I interrupted. By my husband. She flinched. I looked up to you, she whispered. You always had everything together. I never did. And I hated needing you so much. And this was your way of what? Taking back power? No, she said quickly. I didn't want to hurt you. But you did. She nodded, tears streaming down her face every day, and I couldn't stop. I wanted to. But I kept hoping he'd leave you, and then I'd be able to say it wasn't wrong anymore. You wanted him to leave me, I said, voice cold. She buried her face in her hands. I sat there, staring at the girl I'd shared a childhood with. The girl I'd defended from bullies, comforted after heartbreaks, helped through college applications. And now, she was just a stranger with my face and my blood. I trust you, I said quietly. I trusted you both. She didn't respond. She just wept. And I realized in that moment that no apology, no confession could ever fix this. They didn't deny it anymore. But that didn't make it better. It made it real. I never thought betrayal could divide a family so easily. But it did. When I told my parents what had happened, that my husband of 10 years had been having an affair with my sister, I expected rage, shock, maybe tears. I expected them to take me into their arms and say, how could she do this to you? Instead, they were quiet, too quiet. My mother looked down at her tea, stirring it slowly. My father rubbed his temples like he was listening to someone describe a traffic jam, not a gut-wrenching violation of trust. Then my mother spoke. We all make mistakes. That was her opening line. I sat in disbelief. You think this was a mistake? She's been sleeping with my husband for months, behind my back. She's young, she said. She's not that young, I snapped. She's 29. She knows better. She's always been sensitive, my father added. You've always been the strong one. I stared at them. What does that have to do with anything? They exchanged a look. And that's when it hit me. They already knew. Maybe not the full truth, maybe not the details. But they had sensed it, suspected it, and chosen silence. How long? I asked. How long have you known? We didn't know. My mother insisted. We thought there was some tension. We assumed it would pass. I felt my stomach twist. You assumed your daughter sleeping with her sister's husband would pass. She told us she was in a difficult situation. My mother said softly. She didn't give names. We didn't want to pry. But you didn't stop her either. We asked her to think about the family, to consider what it would do to you and Evan. That name. My son. The only innocent piece of this entire puzzle. I stood up. You asked her to think about the family? What about me? What about my son? My father raised his hands. Please, don't make this worse than it already is. The most important thing now is to keep the family together. I nearly laughed. Together? You think I'm going to play happy families after this? My mother's voice sharpened. Don't make a scene. You don't want to destroy everything over a moment of weakness. And there it was. The betrayal under betrayal. Not only had my sister and my husband torn my life apart, but my parents had chosen to minimize it to protect the wrong person. I felt like a ghost in my own bloodline. For the next few days, I avoided them. They called, left voicemails, asked me to come for dinner so we could talk things through. They didn't say the words, "We're sorry." Not once. Instead, they said things like, "Let's not let this divide us, and Maya's going through a hard time, she needs you. She needs me." The irony was cruel. Dan, too, had started acting like this was a temporary rift. He came home from work, asked if I wanted to talk, suggested counseling. He even said, unblinking, that we could get through this. I asked him one night, would you have stopped if I hadn't walked in? He didn't answer. That was answer enough. I began to feel like I was the one who had disrupted everything. Like, I was the force tearing the family apart, not the one betrayed, but the one who refused to forgive. People kept saying, don't let it destroy the family. But they had already destroyed it. I was just standing in the wreckage, refusing to pretend the house was still whole. Even Evan noticed the shift. He asked, why doesn't Aunt Maya come over anymore? I froze. She's taking some time away, I said gently. He frowned. But she was just next door. That stopped me cold. What? She told me. She said she's living near us now. My world tilted again. I looked it up, and sure enough, Mia had rented the house next door. Dan helped her move in. They hadn't even told me. My parents had known. That much was clear from the way they'd urged me to keep the peace. Keep the peace. No, not anymore. That was the day I decided, if no one was going to protect me, not my husband, not my sister, not even my parents, then I would protect myself. I would choose me, and Evan, no more holding the family together, because the family I knew, the one I thought I belonged to, was gone. Children feel everything, even when we think we're shielding them. Evan had always been a bright, sensitive boy. He picked up on tones, silences, glances. I used to joke that he was more observant than most adults, but after the night everything fell apart. And especially after Mia moved in next door, he started asking questions I didn't know how to answer. At first, it was little things. Why don't you and Dad eat together anymore? Why is Aunt Mia always at our house when I'm asleep? Then the questions grew heavier. Why do you look sad all the time? And finally, did Aunt Mia do something bad? That one hit me like a punch. I sat with him on the couch, tucked his hair behind his ear, and said gently, what makes you ask that? He shrugged, his little legs swinging off the edge. Because you used to laugh more when she was here. Now you don't. I didn't know what to say. He was too young to know the truth, but not too young to feel it, so I told him the only thing I could. Sometimes people we love hurt us, and it takes time to understand why. He looked at me for a long moment. Is that why Dad sleeps on the couch? I nodded. We're trying to figure out what's best for our family. He didn't ask more that night, but I saw it in his eyes. The worry. The cracks forming in the foundation of his world. And the worst part, he still loved them, both of them. He'd run into Maya's arms when she came by the fence. He'd hold Dan's hand when they walked to school together, because to him they were just Dad and Auntie, not the people who had betrayed his mother. That's what made it all harder. I wasn't just dealing with my own heartbreak. I was trying to hold together a child's sense of safety in a world that had quietly collapsed. Dan didn't make it easier. He insisted we keep things normal for Evan's sake. But what did normal even mean now? He said we shouldn't fight in front of him. I agreed, but then he'd try to pretend like nothing had changed, asking me if I wanted to watch a movie, acting like we were still a team. Mia, too, tiptoed around Evan. She never came into our house again, but Evan visited her next door when Dan took him over. I didn't like it, didn't trust it. But I also didn't want to rip his world apart overnight. He didn't deserve that. So I let it happen for a while. Until the night Evan came home with something that shattered me all over again. He handed me a drawing. He'd made it at Maya's. It was a picture of a house, our house, with 3 stick figures inside him, Dan and Mia. Outside the house in the corner was a smaller figure alone, standing in the rain. "Who's this?" I asked, pointing to the corner. "That's you," he said simply. "You live somewhere else now." I felt my throat close. "Why do you think that?" He looked down. "Because Aunt Mia said you might be going away. That maybe you didn't want to live here anymore." My hands began to shake. She had no right to say that, no right to plant those seeds in my son's head. I called Dan that night. He answered on the second ring. "Hey, I want full custody," I said. "Starting now?" There was silence on the other end. "Wait, what?" "I'm not keeping him from you," I said. "But he stays with me. I don't want her anywhere near him unless it's supervised." "You crossed a line." "She didn't mean anything by it," he said quickly. "She was just trying to prepare him." "She's not his mother," I cut in. "She doesn't get to prepare him for anything. Hay loves her," Dan said, quieter now. "She's been like a second parent." "No," I said, my voice cold. "She's the reason his parents are falling apart. And if you can't see how damaging this is, then you're not thinking about him. You're thinking about her." I hung up before he could answer. That night, Evan slept curled against me, breathing softly, clutching his stuffed bear, and I made another quiet vow. He would never be used as a pawn between adults who didn't know how to be honest. He would grow up safe and loved, even if that meant I had to stand alone. The day Mia moved into the house next door felt like a surreal joke the universe was playing on me. It happened 2 weeks after the confrontation. I had just returned from grocery shopping when I saw the moving truck parked outside the vacant house beside ours. At first, I didn't think anything of it. People moved in and out of that place all the time. It wasn't until I saw Dan in the driveway, carrying a box labeled M.A. Spilles, that I felt the blood drain from my face. He turned, saw me, and froze. I didn't say a word. I walked past him, groceries clutched tight, heart pounding, vision blurred with fury. She followed him out of the house a moment later, her hair in a messy bun, dressed casually like it was any normal afternoon. She had the nerve to wave. I didn't wave back. I waited until Evan was asleep that night to confront Dan. "You didn't even ask me," I said. "You didn't even think about how it would affect Evan? How it would affect me?" Dan looked tired, older. It was her decision. The lease came up on her apartment. She needed somewhere close. "And it's not like she's moving in with me. You're telling me you had nothing to do with it?" He hesitated just a second too long. "She wanted to be near Evan," he said finally. "And yes, I helped her find the listing. But that's it. She wanted to be near Evan." I repeated, my voice rising. "Or near you. She's not trying to hurt you," he said, almost pleading. "Too late for that," I replied. "She lives next door, Dan." Next door? Every time I took out the trash, every time I pulled into the driveway, every time Evan looked out his window, there she would be. A constant reminder of everything I had lost. It was a special kind of cruelty, one that went beyond betrayal. It was intrusion, invasion, occupation. My home was no longer a safe space. It was a battlefield. Maya's presence crept into our lives like smoke through cracks. Evan would come home talking about the snacks Aunt Mia made. He started bringing home little trinkets. A toy, a bracelet, a note with a heart, and love, Auntie M. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I kept my rage quiet, contained, because Evan didn't know, and I didn't want him to carry the weight of this ugliness. Still, it chipped away at me. There were evenings I'd sit at the dining table and hear laughter through the wall. Her voice, his voice. Sometimes Evan's. It was muffled but unmistakable. A family gathering? Just without me. I told myself to be mature, to stay calm. But one night as I stepped outside to take a call, I caught sight of them through her living room window. Dan and Mia on the couch, not touching but sitting close. Too close, and that was the moment I realized they weren't hiding anymore. Not from me, not from Evan. They had built a new version of our life. Next door. A mirror image without me in it, and I had to see it every day. My parents came over not long after to check in. My mother brought food. My father stood awkwardly in the living room, clearly waiting for the tension to pass. I asked them point blank, "Did you know she was moving in?" They exchanged that look again. The same one they'd shared when I first told them about the affair. She mentioned she needed a place. My mother said carefully, "We didn't realize it would be this close." "Did you try to stop her?" Silence. Of course they hadn't. "She's still your sister." My father said, "You have to find a way to coexist." Coexist? I repeated. She broke my marriage, she broke my trust, and now I'm supposed to smile and wave from my garden. "She didn't move here to hurt you." My mother insisted. "She just doesn't want to lose the family." "She isn't family anymore?" I said coldly. "Not to me." After they left, I sat on the porch for a long time, staring at the fence that separated our houses. It used to be just a line in the grass. Now it was a wall between two worlds, one I had been pushed out of, and one I had no intention of ever entering again. Leaving wasn't an impulsive decision. It was a slow, painful peeling away from the life I had built. I didn't wake up one morning and decide to walk out. I lingered, hesitated, gave space for change. But change didn't come. At least, not the kind I needed. Dan kept trying to act as though time would heal everything. As if we could just keep parenting, keep coexisting, and eventually forget the middle part. The betrayal. He even suggested couples counseling again. I remember the exact moment I knew I had to go. It was early autumn, and the leaves had begun to fall in gentle showers onto our driveway. Evan and I were raking together. Mia came out of her house, waved at Evan, and he ran to her before I could stop him. She scooped him up in her arms, spinning him in circles, both of them laughing. I stood there, rake frozen in my hands, watching the life that used to be mine being lived 5 feet away. Dan came out seconds later, a thermos in hand. He handed it to her like they'd done it 100 times before. She took it with a smile. Their eyes met. It was subtle, but it was enough. They were comfortable, they were already a unit, and I was the one lingering like an afterthought. Later that night, I sat at the kitchen table after Evan went to sleep. The house was quiet, save for the hum of the refrigerator and the soft creak of the wind outside. Dan came in, glanced at me, and started to pass through. "I'm leaving," I said. He paused. "I'm taking Evan," I said. "We're going. I found an apartment, close enough for school, far enough from here." He didn't respond immediately. Finally, he said, "You don't have to do this." I looked at him. "Yes, I do." He sat down across from me. "You think you're protecting him. But he loves her. He loves both of us. And I love him," I said. "Which is why I won't let him grow up thinking this is normal, this confusion, this duplicity." He exhaled, ran a hand over his face. "You're angry? You have every right to be. But leaving won't make it easier." "No," I said. "But it'll make it clearer." I wanted clarity more than peace. I wanted space to breathe, to rebuild something, anything. That felt true. Packing was its own heartbreak. Every item folded was a memory. Every box sealed was a goodbye. Avon didn't understand, not fully. I told him we were going to have a new adventure, just the two of us. He asked if Dad was coming. I said no. He asked about Mia. I didn't answer. We moved into a 2-bedroom apartment with a tiny balcony and an old, creaky floor. The walls were thin, the view was a parking lot, and the fridge made a rattling noise at night. But it was ours. It was real. It was free of ghosts. The first night we slept there, Avon crawled into my bed and whispered, "Will Aunt Mia come visit?" I pulled him close. "No, sweetheart, not right now." He didn't ask why. He didn't cry. He just lay beside me until we both drifted into sleep. The weeks that followed were hard. The silence was thick. Avon missed his routine, missed his dad, missed the backyard. But slowly I watched him adapt. We made our own new habits. Pancake Sundays, flashlight reading nights, long walks to the park. I enrolled him in a new drawing class. He drew a house with 2 figures this time, just him and me holding hands. Dan called often. At first, I ignored him. Then I set boundaries, scheduled visits, no surprise appearances, no overnight stays unless discussed. He agreed. He even apologized once. Not for the affair, but for how I'd been made to feel. It wasn't enough, but I didn't expect it to be any more. Mia sent a letter. Not a text, not a voicemail. A handwritten letter left in the mailbox at my apartment. It began with, "I know you probably won't read this, but I needed to say it anyway." She wrote about guilt, about loneliness, about how she had felt invisible most of her life, overshadowed by me, by our parents' expectations, by her own failures. She didn't ask for forgiveness, she didn't justify what she'd done. But at the end, she wrote, "If I could take it back, I would, not because I don't love him, but because I miss my sister more than I love anything else." I read it once, then I put it in a drawer. I didn't burn it, I didn't cry. I just let it sit, like a piece of someone I used to know. The first year away was both the hardest and the most necessary time of my life. I didn't transform overnight. There was no sudden blossoming, no dramatic rebirth, just slow, quiet, persistent survival. Healing came in inches, not miles, and often it came disguised as exhaustion. At first, I counted the days. 1 week since I left, 2 weeks without seeing them, a month since Evan last mentioned Maya's name. The passage of time felt like a fragile wall I was building between then and now. In our little apartment, I rearranged furniture more times than I cared to admit. I wanted to feel like I was doing something, even if it was just moving a couch. I changed our bedding to a warm golden tone, bought soft curtains, added plants. I think I was trying to grow something, even if it was just a fern that kept leaning toward the light. Work became a quiet place of escape. My coworkers didn't ask about my sudden change in address or why I took longer lunches now. They just smiled when I did and nodded when I sat silently in meetings. I appreciated that more than they knew. Evan struggled at first. He missed his backyard. He asked why Daddy didn't tuck him in anymore. He drew pictures of our old house, sometimes placing a stick figure far away from the others. But over time he adjusted, Children are resilient, it's what people say, and it's mostly true, but I knew some part of him had hardened, like mine had. Still, we created rituals that belonged to us: Sunday pancakes with whipped cream, library days every other Thursday, and yes, days where he could choose anything from the dinner menu, which usually meant cereal and ice cream. These little things became anchors in the floating, unfamiliar sea of our new life. Dan saw Evan on weekends. Sometimes he'd pick him up, sometimes I'd drop him off. We kept it polite, brief. He never brought Mia with him, and I never asked if they were still together. One time, he lingered in the hallway of my apartment as Evan put on his shoes. "You look good," he said quietly. I didn't respond. He tried again. "I think about you, about us, all the time." I met his gaze. "Then why didn't you choose me?" He looked away. That was our final real conversation. A few months later, I heard through a mutual friend that Mia had started working at a local floral shop. I imagined her arranging lilies and roses while customers smiled and thanked her, unaware of what she'd done. The idea used to burn me, but now it just made me sad. I still had her letter in my drawer. I'd read it once every few months, not because I missed her, but because I needed to remember. Not out of pain, out of clarity. It reminded me that love alone is not a shield, that people can love you and still destroy you. Autumn turned into winter and I realized something. I no longer checked the time when Evan was with Dan. I no longer walked past mirrors expecting to see a broken woman. Instead, I started walking with my head high, not proud, not vengeful, steady. One snowy evening, Evan and I built a lopsided snowman on the apartment lawn. He named it Captain Cold Nose and insisted we give it a scarf. I used my favorite blue one, the one Dan had given me years ago. When Evan wasn't looking, I left it there. Letting go happens in moments like that. Small, almost invisible. You breathe in, and suddenly, something heavy is no longer sitting on your chest. By the end of that first year, I stopped marking the days. Because I wasn't surviving anymore. I was living. It was the second winter, cold, quiet, and sharp. When she came to my door, I hadn't seen Mia in over a year, not even in passing. Dan still picked up Evan for visitations, and though I occasionally heard her name mentioned in vague fragments, it was always muffled by time and disinterest. I had placed her in a part of my life I no longer touched. Like an old wound, scarred over and silent. But one evening as I was folding laundry and Evan was in the bath, there was a knock at the door. I thought it might be a neighbor, or maybe even Dan, arriving early. But when I opened it I saw her Mia. She looked thinner, paler. Her eyes were swollen, from crying or exhaustion I couldn't tell. She wore no makeup, no smile, just a long wool coat, buttoned up to her neck and gloveless hands tucked into her sleeves. I froze. "What are you doing here?" She exhaled, a visible plume of breath in the cold. "I just needed to see you." I didn't say anything. "I won't stay long," she added quickly. "Please?" Part of me wanted to close the door right then, but something in her face, not desperation, not guilt, something raw, unmasked, kept me still. I stepped aside. She walked in like a ghost, like someone who didn't belong anywhere anymore. I didn't offer her tea. I didn't ask how she was. I just stood, arms crossed, waiting. She looked around, eyes lingering on Evan's drawings on the fridge, the coat rack, the quiet hum of life she no longer had access to. "I'm sorry," she said barely above a whisper. I nodded, slowly. "I know. I never wanted to take anything from you." "You didn't just take," I said. "You destroyed?" She flinched. "I know." The silence between us was thick, unbearable. She sat on the edge of the couch like she was afraid it would break under her. "Dan and I were not together anymore," she said. I raised an eyebrow. "Did he cheat on you too?" That hit her. I didn't regret saying it. "No," she said quietly. "He just stopped trying, like he ran out of whatever it was he thought he had." I leaned against the wall, watching her carefully. "I thought once you were gone," she continued, "that he and I would finally be real, that it would feel right, but it never did." I didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. I thought I loved him, maybe I did, but I think it was just that I wanted to feel chosen, and he made me feel chosen until he didn't. I looked down at my hands. "What do you want, Mia?" She hesitated. "I don't know." Tears filled her eyes. "I keep remembering our childhood, the games we played, how you used to brush my hair when I cried. I thought about calling 1,000 times. But I knew you wouldn't answer." I didn't respond. I didn't trust myself to speak. "I don't expect forgiveness," she added. "I don't even expect you to talk to me again. I just wanted to say I was lost, and I hurt you in ways I can't undo. But I never stopped loving you." There it was, the truth, the broken, late, jagged truth. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time since it happened I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel rage. I felt something like grief. Not for what she'd done, but for what we had been, and would never be again. I walked to the door and opened it. She stood slowly. "Mia," I said softly. You're not the villain of my life, but you're not my sister anymore either? She nodded. Tears spilled freely now. I'm sorry, she whispered again, and then she left. I closed the door behind her, stood there in the quiet. Evan called from the bathroom, Mom, where's my towel? I smiled, and for the first time in a long time it felt real. When the call came about Dan's illness, I felt something twist deep in my gut, not grief, not panic, but something cold and confused. It was his sister who called. She'd always been distant, respectful of boundaries. She didn't have all the details, just enough. Dan had collapsed at work. Diagnosis pending, something neurological, they were doing tests. I hadn't spoken to him in weeks. Evan had started visiting less, mostly by his own choice. Dan was tired lately, Evan said, always lying down. The news hit me in waves. A man I had loved, a man who broke me, now broken by something he couldn't control. I took Evan to the hospital the next day. Dan looked thinner. His skin was pale, his eyes ringed with fatigue, but he smiled when we walked in. Hey, bud, he said, his voice weaker than I remembered. Evan ran to him. They talked, laughed. I stood in the corner, watching, quiet. After Evan left with his aunt to get a snack, Dan and I were alone. He looked at me, really looked. You didn't have to come? I didn't come for you, I said. I came for him. He nodded slowly, accepting that without protest. There was silence. Then he said, It's a brain tumor. The words landed like a slow, thudding hammer. They think it's aggressive, he continued. I'll know more soon. I sat down, not close, just near enough to listen. I've thought a lot about things, he said. About what I did. What I ruined. I didn't speak. I don't expect forgiveness, he said. But I do need you to know. I never stopped loving you. Even when I was with her, I told myself I could handle both worlds. I was wrong. I looked at him, unsure if the words meant anything now. Why didn't you end it with me before it started? I asked. Why not just walk away instead of tearing everything down? He turned his head, slowly, painfully. Because I was weak, and I thought maybe you'd never find out, and if you didn't then no one had to get hurt. You knew I would, I said softly. He closed his eyes. I just didn't want to be the man who hurt you. But I became him anyway. There it was, the cowardice finally named. I didn't stop loving you, he repeated, but you stopped protecting me, I said. Tears slid down the sides of his face. He didn't wipe them. I wanted to tell Evan the truth someday, he said. But I didn't know how. I didn't want him to hate me. He doesn't hate you, I said. But he sees you differently now. He nodded. I've made peace with the life I lost. I added, you need to do the same. While you still can. He looked at me then, not as a husband or a partner, or a man seeking forgiveness. Just as someone near the end, trying to gather up the pieces. I'm glad you left, he said quietly. I blinked. What? You were strong enough to do what I couldn't. You gave Evan a safe home. I never thanked you for that. And for the first time, something inside me softened. He wasn't asking for me back. He wasn't making excuses. He was letting go. I stood to leave. Evan would be back soon. Life had to keep moving. At the door, I turned back. Goodbye, Dan. His voice was barely audible. Goodbye, Liv. That was the last time I saw him. 3 weeks later, he passed. Evan cried, long, full of questions I couldn't answer. We held each other for hours. I attended the funeral quietly in the back. Mia wasn't there. Dan's final words weren't enough to fix everything. But they were enough to finally end it. Grief doesn't always come with crying. Sometimes it's just silence, a deep, stretching silence that hangs over everything. After Dan's funeral, there were days when Evan would wake up crying, asking why his dad had to leave. I would hold him close, rubbing his back in slow circles, whispering, he didn't want to go. He loved you very much. I didn't mention the other truth, the harder one, that Dan had already left long before his illness, long before his last breath. He had walked away from our life in slow, selfish increments. His death just made it final. I was surprised at how steady I felt. Not because I didn't mourn, I did. But I mourned the man he had been before it all. The husband who held my hand when I gave birth. The father who made Evan giggle until he hiccuped. The partner who once kissed my forehead every morning. That man had disappeared long ago. The version left behind. The one who lied, betrayed, and tried to divide. I had grieved already. His death felt like a long closed chapter, not a fresh wound. Mia sent flowers. No note, no return address. Just a modest bouquet of white chrysanthemums and a single yellow rose. I didn't reach out. By then she had already moved again. I learned through a mutual acquaintance. Somewhere far. Quiet. Alone. I never told Evan about the affair. Not yet. Maybe someday, when he's older, when questions need honest answers. But for now he remembers his father in light, playing soccer, eating ice cream, falling asleep during cartoons. And I let him keep those memories. We stayed in the apartment for another year. Long enough for Evan to finish second grade, long enough for me to believe that our healing was more than surface, deep. Then, one spring morning as I watched Evan chase a kite across the park, I knew it was time. Time to let go fully. Time to begin again. I sold the last box of Dan's things, donated old furniture, signed a lease on a new place with more light and space for Evan to grow. The past didn't disappear. It lived in drawers, in photos, in scars. But it no longer owned me. We moved forward. Not as victims, not as survivors, but simply as a mother and son, building something new, something clean, something we were happy. Not every day, not always loudly, but truly, quietly happy. The above story shows how deeply family bonds can be tested, how betrayal, even by the ones closest to us, can reshape everything we thought we knew about love, trust, and home. It reminds us that healing doesn't come through revenge or regret, but through time, distance, and the courage to begin again. Even when blood is shared, trust must be earned, and once broken, it may never return in the same form. These are the limits of family relationships, how far we can stretch before we finally snap. How love without loyalty becomes a weapon. How even the deepest connections can unravel when truth is replaced with silence. If this story resonated with you, if you've experienced something similar, I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice might help someone else find theirs. And if you'd like more stories like this, real, raw, and reflective, please subscribe,